I don't care if you re the King of England or the President of the United States. No one talks to my staff like that." Ashley Gonzalez's voice cut through the morning buzz of Coastal Brew, her caramel eyes blazing as she faced the tall, impeccably dressed man who'd just reduced her newest barista to tears. The entire cafe fell silent, customers freezing mid-sip as Ashley squared her shoulders against the stranger's imposing presence. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Christopher Lee wasn't just any demanding customer. In an expensive suit, he owned not only this cafe, but the entire chain of Coastal Brew locations spreading across Southern California. And as he stared into the fierce eyes of the woman defending her staff with the ferocity of a lioness, something unexpected happened. For the first time in years, Christopher Lee was speechless. "Miss, I simply pointed out that—" he began, his voice controlled yet somehow softer than before. "What you pointed out was unnecessarily cruel," Ashley interrupted, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I've been here 3 days. 3. You think you never made a mistake in your first week at a job?" A muscle twitched in Christopher's jaw as he glanced at the young barista wiping tears from her cheeks. He had not intended to be harsh. He merely expressed disappointment that his usual precision-crafted Americano tasted nothing like what he was accustomed to. But seeing it through this fiery manager's eyes, perhaps his tone had been excessive. "You'd right," he said, finally the words unfamiliar on his tongue. When was the last time he'd admitted to being wrong? "I apologize for my behavior." He turned to Mia, whose eyes widened in surprise. "I am sorry for speaking to you that way. Everyone deserves patience while learning." Ashley Teng's expression softened just slightly, but the wariness remained. "Thank you. I'll make your drink myself. What was it again?" "Americano, 2 shots, splash of cream," he replied, pulling out his wallet. "It's on the house today," she said, already, moving toward the espresso machine. "No, I insist on paying." Something about being given charity by his own business amused him, though he kept his expression neutral. As Ashley worked, her movements precise and confident, Christopher found himself unable to look away. His COO, James, had suggested he visit his locations incognito to better understand the customer experience, but he'd never expected to find someone like her, someone unafraid to stand up to power, even when she didn't realize just how much power she was confronting. "Here you go," she said, sliding the perfect cup across the counter. "Enjoy your day, sir." He took a sip and couldn't help the satisfied smile that spread across his face. "Perfect. Thank you, Ashley," he said, reading her name tag. "Would you do re-welcome, Mr. Lee, Christopher Lee?" Something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Well, Mr. Lee, I hope your day improves from here." "It already has," he replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. As Christopher left the cafe, sipping the best Americano he'd had in months, he pulled out his phone. The executive leadership meeting scheduled for that afternoon could wait. He had more important matters to attend to, specifically learning everything there was to know about Ashley Gonzalez, the cafe manager who had unknowingly just challenged her boss and somehow made him grateful for it. 2 blocks away, Ashley wiped down the counter and sighed. Something about that customer had seemed oddly familiar, but she couldn't place him. With a shrug, she turned her attention back to the morning rush, unaware that her life was about to change completely. That evening, as Ashley locked up the cafe, her phone buzzed with a text from her eccentric Aunt Lydia. "Darling, I've signed us up for a sommelier course. No arguments. It is time you learned something beyond those coffee beans you were so obsessed with. First class tomorrow at 7. Ashley groaned. Her aunt's spontaneous educational ventures rarely ended well, but she couldn't deny that expanding her palate might help with the coffee blends she'd been experimenting with. "No, fine," she texted back, "but if it is boring, I am blaming you." Little did she know that when she walked into that wine class the next evening, she'd come face to face with Christopher Lee once again, this time with both of them about to discover truths that would turn their worlds upside down. The Vineyard Institute of San Diego gleamed like a beacon against the darkening California sky, its modern glass structure reflecting the last rays of sunset as Ashley hurried up the steps. She was late. A spilled latte on her favorite blouse had forced a last-minute change, and if there was one thing Ashley hated, it was making an entrance. "Deep breaths," she muttered to herself, straightening her shoulders before pushing open the heavy door to classroom 3. It's just wine, not brain surgery. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled toward her as she entered, but only one set made. Her freeze mid-step, sitting at the front of the semicircle of tables, wine glass poised elegantly between long fingers, was Christopher Lee, the demanding customer from yesterday's Café confrontation. "Ah, our final student has arrived," announced the instructor, a silver-haired woman with impossibly perfect posture. "Please take a seat, Ms. Gonzalez, Ashley Gonzalez," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. The only empty chair was, naturally, right beside Christopher. The universe really did have a twisted sense of humor. As Ashley slid into her seat, Christopher leaned slightly toward her. "We meet again," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Our fate seems determined to put us in each other in West's paths. Or maybe San Diego is smaller than we think," she whispered back, unfolding her course materials while trying to ignore the subtle notes of his cologne, something woodsy with hints of citrus that reminded her, oddly enough, of her favorite coffee blend. "Today we begin our journey through the sensory experience of wine," the instructor announced. "You will be working in pairs for the blind tasting exercise. The person beside you will be your partner for the duration of this course." Ashley shot Christopher a sideways glance and found him already watching her, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Lucky me," he said, raising his empty glass in a mock toast. "And just don't to critique my technique like you did poor Mia's coffee," she replied, though there was less bite in her words than she intended. Something like regret flashed across his face. "I deserved that, and I truly am sorry about yesterday." Before Ashley could respond, the instructor placed 2 identical black glasses before them. "Begin with visual assessment, then aroma, finally taste. Compare notes with your partner before we discuss as a group." They worked in surprisingly companionable silence, Ashley jotting detailed notes while Christopher swirled his glass with practiced ease. When their eyes met over the rims of their glasses, Ashley was startled by the intensity of his gaze, calculated yet curious, as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. "You are quite good at this," Christopher commented after they compared observations on the first wine. "Your palate is remarkably precise." "Years of coffee tasting," she shrugged, though she couldn't help feeling pleased. "Different medium, similar principles." "You're passionate about coffee." It wasn't a question. "It has been my life since I was 16, she admitted. "My parents owned a small roastery before they died. Working with coffee feels like keeping them close somehow." Christopher E.'s expression softened. "I understand that connection. My father built our family business from nothing. Now it is my responsibility to honor that legacy." "What business?" Ashley asked, suddenly, realizing she knew nothing about this man beyond his coffee preferences and apparent wealth. A strange smile played across his lips. "Food service, primarily. We have various interests." Before she could press further, the instructor called for their attention, and the moment passed. Throughout the evening, Ashley found herself increasingly Drawn to Christopher's insights, he was knowledgeable without being condescending, passionate without being pretentious. By the time they tasted 6 different wines, she'd almost forgotten their inauspicious first meeting. As they gathered their belongings at the end of class, Christopher hesitated. "I know this might seem forward, but would you join me for dinner? There is a small bistro around the corner that pairs wonderfully with what we've learned tonight." Ashley should have said no. This man had made her newest employee cry just yesterday. Yet something in his expression, a vulnerability beneath the confident exterior, made her curious. "One dinner," she agreed. "But if you are rude to our server, I am leaving immediately." His laugh was genuine, transforming his usually serious face. Fair enough. The bistro was indeed small, just 12 tables in a warmly lit space that smelled of fresh bread and herbs. Christopher spoke briefly to the maitre d', who immediately led them to a corner table with a perfect view of both the kitchen and the street outside. "Do you know everyone in this city?" Ashley asked as they settled in. "Not everyone," he replied with that same enigmatic smile, "just the important ones." As they ordered and their conversation flowed from wines to books to travel dreams, Ashley found herself reluctantly charmed by this complex man. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her hopes of someday opening her own specialty cafe. He asked thoughtful questions about her coffee experiments and shared stories of his own travels to coffee-growing regions. "You know," she said, studying him over the rim of her wine glass, "you were nothing like I expected after our first meeting." "What did you expect?" "A privileged businessman with an inflated ego and zero empathy." And now, his eyes held hers, genuinely curious. Ashley considered him for a long moment. "The jury cease, still out on the privilege, but your ego seems mostly in check. And you might actually have a heart under that expensive suit." "High praise indeed," he laughed, then grew serious. "Ashley, there is something I should tell you about." He was interrupted by his phone buzzing insistently. With an apologetic glance, he checked the screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, I have to take this. It's about work." As Christopher stepped outside to take the call, Ashley found herself watching him through the window. In profile against the streetlights, his expression had transformed, commanding, decisive, the easy charm replaced by sharp authority. Who exactly was Christopher Lee? When he returned, his demeanor had shifted subtly. "I apologize, but I need to cut our evening short. There's a situation that requires my attention." "Of course," Ashley said, trying to ignore her disappointment. Business emergencies wait for no one. After he paid the bill despite her protests, Christopher walked her to her car. In the soft glow of the street lamps, he seemed to be wrestling with something unsaid. "I enjoyed tonight, Ashley, more than I expected to." "Me too," she admitted, "despite my better judgment." He smiled at that. "Would you consider meeting again? Perhaps coffee next time, on your territory." Ashley knew she should be cautious. Men like Christopher Lee, wealthy, powerful, undeniably attractive, were not typically part of her world. Yet she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." As she drove home to her aunt's eccentric Victorian house in La Mesa, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important about Christopher Lee. Little did she know that back in his penthouse overlooking the Pacific, Christopher was staring at a folder containing everything his corporate investigators had discovered about Ashley Gonzalez, including her employment at his own company and the fact that she had absolutely no idea who he really was. "You need to tell her," James said, leaning against the sleek desk in Christopher S. office the next morning. As Chief Operating Officer of Lee Hospitality Group, James Porter had been Christopher E.'s right hand for nearly a decade, and he'd never been one to mince words. "Before this gets any more complicated," Christopher swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Diego Bay, his reflection fragmented by the morning light. "I know. You know, yet you've gone on what? 2 wine classes and a dinner date with her now, while she still thinks you were just some random businessman who happened to be rude in her cafe." "It's not that simple," Christopher sighed, turning back to face his friend. "The moment I tell her I am actually her boss, the owner of not just Coastal Brew, but 17 other restaurant and cafe chains, everything changes." James raised an eyebrow. "That was precisely the point of your undercover visits, to see your businesses as they really are, not the sanitized version executives present to the owner." "Yes, to see the businesses," Christopher emphasized, "not to meet someone like her." On his desk sat the company profile of Ashley Gonzalez, 32 years old, manager of Coastal Brew's flagship location for 3 years, consistently top-rated for customer satisfaction and staff retention. Orphaned at 19, when her parents died in a car accident, she'd put herself through business school while working full-time at various coffee shops. Her performance reviews described her as fiercely loyal, innovative, and occasionally stubborn when advocating for her team. No, what the file didn't capture was the way her eyes lit up when she talked about coffee origins, or how she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating on a wine bouquet, or the surprising bark of laughter she'd let out when he'd made a particularly terrible pun during their second wine class. "You like her," James stated, not a question, but a realization. "I respect her professional capabilities," Christopher replied automatically. "No, you like her. I haven't seen you this distracted since—" James stopped himself. "Since Eliza," the unspoken name hung between them. Christopher's ex-fiancée, who had walked away when building the business, had consumed too much of his time. That had been 3 years ago, and since then, Christopher had buried himself in work, expanding Lee Hospitality Group into one of the fastest-growing restaurant groups in the region. "I am telling her tonight," Christopher said firmly. "We're meeting for coffee after her shift. At her cafe. No, at Moonlight Roasters, neutral territory." James nodded approvingly. "Smart. Just remember, the longer you wait, the worse it will be." Ashley hummed as she wiped down the espresso machine, earning a curious look from Mia. "You were cheerful today," the younger woman observed. "Does it have anything to do with that mysterious man who's been texting you all day?" Ashley felt her cheeks warm. "He is not mysterious. He is just a new friend, a friend who makes you blush like that. Spill, Ashley." With a glance to ensure no customers needed attention, Ashley leaned against the counter. "We met in that wine course Aunt Lydia signed me up for. He's intelligent, successful, surprisingly funny once you get past the serious exterior." "Ah, and gorgeous," Mia added with a knowing smile. "I remember him from the other day, even through my tears. Tall, dark hair with those distinguished silver streaks at the temples. Killer suit." "Yes, fine. He's attractive," Ashley admitted. "But it's complicated. Because he was rude that one time? People have bad days, Ashley. You be always said to judge people by patterns, not incidents." Ashley sighed. "It's not just that. He's clearly wealthy, probably runs some massive corporation. Meanwhile, I am a cafe manager who lives with her eccentric aunt because San Diego rent is insane. You're also brilliant, passionate, and—" Mia wiggled her eyebrows dramatically. "Smoking hot in those jeans." Ashley laughed, tossing her cleaning cloth at her colleague. "You were ridiculous, and I am meeting him for coffee in—" She checked her watch. 2 hours, so I need to finish inventory before I go." D. As she counted bags of Brazilian single-origin beans in the storeroom, Ashley's phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. "Looking forward to tonight? There is something important I need to discuss with you." Her heart did an unexpected flip. Important discussions after just 2 meetings usually meant one of 2 things. Either he was about to confess some deep interest, or he was going to reveal a deal-breaking secret like being married or moving to Antarctica. Sounds serious. Should. I'd be worried, she texted back. His response came quickly, not worried, just open-minded. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Ashley finished her shift and drove home to change. Aunt Lydia was hosting her monthly literary time travel book club, where members dressed as characters from whatever historical novel they were discussing. Today, a selection appeared to be a Regency romance, judging by the women in empire waist gowns sipping tea in the living room. "Ashley, darling," Lydia exclaimed, her bright turquoise gown a flamboyant interpretation of period dress. "Come, join us." Mrs. Whitmore was just explaining how Bridgerton has completely rejuvenated her marriage. "Can tea, Aunt Lyd? I am me meeting someone for coffee." Lydia's eyes lit up with interest. "The wine-class man. Oh, splendid. Wear the blue top. It makes your eyes pop." 30 minutes later, Ashley pushed open the door to Moonlight Roasters, immediately appreciating the warm, industrial aesthetic and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee. Christopher was already there, his tall figure easy to spot at a corner table. Unlike their previous meetings, he was dressed more casually, dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that softened his usually formal appearance. He stood when he saw her, his smile genuine but tinged with something that looked suspiciously like nervousness. "You look lovely," he said as she approached. "Thanks, so do you. It is nice to see you. We're not surgically attached to those suits," she teased, settling into the chair he pulled out for her. "I do occasionally allow myself casual attire," he replied with a small smile. "I have already ordered for us. Hope you don't mind. A pour-over Ethiopian yirgacheffer for you cortado for me." Ashley raised an eyebrow. "You remembered my favorite single origin from our conversation the other night?" "I pay attention to details that matter," he said simply. When their coffee arrived, they spent a few minutes in comfortable appreciation of the complex flavors. Ashley noticed Christopher seemed more reserved than during their previous encounters, his fingers tapping lightly against his cup. "So," she finally said, "what is this important matter you wanted to discuss?" Christopher set down his cup and met her eyes. "Ashley, I haven't been entirely forthcoming about who I am." Her stomach tightened. "Are you married?" she blurted out. "What? No." He looked genuinely startled. "Nothing like that." "Foreign spy, secretly royalty, on the run from the law?" She continued, trying to lighten the sudden tension. He laughed, despite himself. "No, though the royalty guess is somewhat closer than you might think, at least in certain business circles." His expression grew serious again. "Ashley, what?" "Is the name of the company that owns Coastal Brew." The question seemed so out of left field that she blinked in confusion. "Lee Hospitality Group. Why? And have you ever met the owner?" "No, of course not. Christopher Lee keeps to his executive tower and lets regional managers handle the likes of us." She stopped suddenly, her brain making connections she should have seen days ago. "Christopher Lee, no, no way." His expression was all the confirmation she needed. "You own Coastal Brew," she stated, her voice flat. "You are my boss boss, actually." Yes. "And you let me lecture you about how to treat your own staff. You let me comp your coffee in your own cafe." The absurdity of it struck her, and she could not decide whether to laugh or be furious. "Why didn't you say something?" Initially I was there incognito, intentionally, evaluating customer experience. Then you confronted me and I was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Impressed. No one speaks to me that way." "Because they know who signs their paychecks," Ashley retorted, the humor fading as implications sank in. So what was all this then? The wine class, dinner, coffee, some kind of elaborate evaluation of a troublesome employee? Christopher S. expression hardened. Is that really what you think of me? I don't know what to think, I just found out the man I've been... She stopped herself. Been what? He pressed, leaning forward. Getting to know, she finished lamely, though they both knew that wasn't what she'd been about to say. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture for someone usually so composed. I should have told you immediately. I kept finding reasons to delay, first because I was genuinely curious about you, then because I enjoyed your company without the weight of my position between us, and finally because I was afraid of exactly this reaction. What reaction did you expect? Oh, you completely misrepresented yourself for days, while I shared personal details about my life. How charming. I never lied to you, Ashley. I simply omitted certain details about my position. The omission is still deception, she countered, then sighed, some of her anger deflating. I need to process this. Christopher nodded slowly. I understand. For what it's worth, nothing about our interactions has been part of some corporate evaluation. My interest in you is entirely personal. The admission hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address its implications. I should go, Ashley said finally, gathering her bag. Thank you for the coffee and for finally being honest. As she stood, Christopher reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching her wrist. Ashley, wait. The wine class tomorrow. Will you still come? She hesitated. The reasonable response would be to drop the class entirely, to create distance between herself and this complication. Yet the thought of not seeing him again created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. I paid for the full course, she said finally. I'll be there. But Christopher, no more secrets. After she left, Christopher remained at the table, staring into his cooling coffee. Her scent, vanilla and something uniquely her, lingered in the air. He expected anger, certainly, but the flash of hurt in her eyes had affected him more than he anticipated. For a man who prided himself on strategic thinking, he mishandled this situation badly. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. How is the incognito project going? Found any insights worth the theatrics? Christopher stared at the message, thinking of Ashley's fierce defense of her staff, her passion for quality, her integrity. More than you know, he texted back. We need to talk about Coastal Brew. I think we've been missing something important. What he didn't add was that he might have found something important in his personal life too, only to risk losing it before it had truly begun. Richard Lee's house, a sprawling mid-century modern masterpiece perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, had always been a sanctuary for Christopher. Growing up as the only child of a visionary restaurateur, he'd spent countless hours in his father's study, learning the business between school and weekends. Now, at 40, Christopher still found himself seeking his father's counsel when faced with complex decisions. So let me understand this correctly, Richard said, absently stroking the sleek Siamese cat purring in his lap. Tiddu, you met this woman when she defended her staff against your admittedly poor behavior, proceeded to accidentally encounter her at a wine course, and have now developed feelings for her, all while concealing that you essentially her employer? Christopher winced. When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it is. Does it? Richard's eyes, the same deep brown as his son's, twinkled with amusement. Seems pretty accurate to me, though I must say I am impressed by her courage. Standing up to a difficult customer is one thing. Standing up to the owner, even unknowingly, shows remarkable character. Kawa, Richard's beloved Siamese, jumped from his lap and sauntered over to Christopher, rubbing against his legs before settling nearby, tail flicking lazily. Even the cat approves, Richard noted. He has always been an excellent judge, of character. Christopher leaned back in his chair, watching as the sunset painted the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. She's, yes, extraordinary, Dad. Not just professionally, though her insights about coastal brew's potential are remarkable, but as a person, she's brilliant, passionate, authentic in a way that's rare in our circles. You sound like me talking about your mother, Richard said softly. She challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. The comparison wasn't lost on Christopher. His mother, Grace, had been a literature professor who wandered into Richard's first struggling restaurant seeking refuge from unexpected rain. Their love story was family legend, the pragmatic businessman and the philosophical academic who balanced each other perfectly until her death 15 years ago. Ashley has every reason to want nothing to do with me, Christopher admitted. I've made a mess of this. Richard considered his son thoughtfully. Perhaps, but if she is as exceptional as you believe, she'll see past the circumstances to the truth, which is that you're a good man who made a mistake, not out of malice, but out of a genuine desire to know her without the complications of your position. Richard shrugged. The question is, what are you willing to do to prove that to her? Ashley had spent the day in a fog, mechanically going through her duties at the cafe, while her mind replayed every interaction with Christopher. How had she not seen it? The way staff at the bistro had deferred to him, his extensive knowledge of the restaurant industry, even his comment about honoring his father's legacy, all clues she missed. You were distracted, Mia observed as they closed the cafe. Did something happen with Mr. Gorgeous? Ashley hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. Mr. Gorgeous turned out to be Mr. Christopher Lee. Mia's eyes widened comically. Oh, wait, as in our boss, Christopher Lee, the owner of Coastal Brew, Christopher Lee. That Christopher Lee. The very same. Holy crap, Mia breathed. No wonder he could afford those suits. What are you going to do? I don't know, Ashley admitted. Part of me wants to never see him again. Another part still likes him, Mia finished knowingly. It's complicated, Ashley sighed. Yeah, there's a power imbalance I can't ignore. Plus, he kept this massive secret. For what, a few days? During which you went on exactly one proper date? Mia pointed out reasonably. It's not like you were planning your wedding, and then discovered he's secretly a foreign prince or something. Despite herself, Ashley laughed. I suppose that's true, but still. Look, Mia said, locking the cafe door behind them. Dating the boss isn't ideal. But if you really like him, and it seems like you do, maybe it's worth hearing him out. Unless... Her expression grew serious. Do you think he was using his position somehow, taking advantage? Ashley considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. But if anything, he seemed to prefer that I didn't know who he was. He appeared genuinely interested in my thoughts on coffee, the business, everything really. Then maybe give him a chance to explain. What's the worst that could happen? And I could lose my heart and my job in one spectacular disaster, Ashley suggested. Mia grinned. Or you could find something amazing. Isn't that worth the risk? The Vineyard Institute's classroom felt charged with tension as Ashley entered for their third wine class. Christopher was already there, his expression lighting with cautious hope when he saw her. She took her assigned seat beside him, acutely, aware of his proximity. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said quietly. I said I would, she replied, busying herself with the course materials. I honor my commitments. Ashley, he began, but was interrupted by the instructor calling the class to order. For the next hour, they worked through a vertical tasting of Cabernet Sauvignon, analyzing the same wine across different vintages. They maintained professional courtesy, exchanging observations about the wines, but the easy rapport of their previous class had been replaced by a careful distance. As they packed up at the end of the session, Christopher turned to her. "May I walk you to your car? There is something I'd like to share with you if you were willing to listen." Against her better judgment, Ashley nodded. Outside, the evening air was cool with a hint of salt from the nearby ocean. They walked in silence until they reached her modest sedan. "I've been thinking about what you said," Christopher began. "About a mission being deception. You were right." Ashley leaned against her car, arms crossed protectively across her chest. "I am listening. I have never been good at personal connections," he admitted. "The business has always been my focus, building what my father started, proving I was worthy of his legacy. It became my identity. When people look at me, they see Lee Hospitality Group first, Christopher second. But that doesn't excuse—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I am not making excuses, just trying to explain. When you confronted me that morning, not knowing who I was, something shifted. You saw me, just me, not the CEO, not the Lee name and all it represents. And then, in the wine class, when you agreed to dinner, it was the first time in years someone wanted to know Christopher, not what Christopher could do for them." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off.
God!
This wasn't to the confident businessman she'd come to know. This was someone more complex, more human. "I should have told you immediately," he continued. "Instead, I selfishly preserved that experience of being known for myself. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Ashley uncrossed her arms, her stance softening slightly. "I understand the appeal of being seen for who you really are. But Christopher, this creates complications you can ignore. You were technically my boss." "I've thought about that too," he said, reaching into his jacket to retrieve an envelope. "This is for you." Puzzled, Ashley opened it to find official-looking documents on Lee Hospitality Group letterhead. As she scanned the content, her eyes widened. "You were transferring ownership of Coastal Brew to a separate entity and offering me position as managing partner." She looked up in shock. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's entirely serious," Christopher said. "My COO and I have been discussing restructuring our holdings for months. This accelerates plans we were already considering, while eliminating any professional conflict between us. You are giving me partial ownership of the business. I am recognizing your talent and offering you the opportunity you deserve," he corrected. "Your ideas for expanding Coastal Brew's specialty offerings, developing direct relationships with growers, implementing sustainability practices, they're brilliant, Ashley. You should be more than a manager." She stared at him in disbelief. "This is overwhelming." "You don't have to decide immediately," he assured her. "Review the documents with a lawyer of your choosing, at my expense. If you accept, you're to report to the board of the new entity, not to me. If you decline, your position at Coastal Brew remains secure, with no repercussions." "And what about—" She gestured vaguely between them. "This, us?" Christopher took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. "That's entirely separate. Whether you accept this professional opportunity or not has no bearing on my feelings for you, Ashley. I care about you more than I expected to, more than is probably wise after such a short time. But I want to pressure you. If you decide you want nothing more to do with me personally, I'd respect that." Oh, the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Ashley felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. This grand gesture wasn't just about romantic interest. It showed a respect for her abilities that few had ever demonstrated. "I need time," she said finally, "to think about all of this." He nodded, stepping back to give her space. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready, whatever you decide." As Ashley drove home, her mind raced with possibilities she'd never dared contemplate. Partial ownership of Coastal Brew would transform her life, allowing her to implement the visions she'd harbored for years. And Christopher, the way he looked at her with that mixture of hope and resignation, suggested feelings far deeper than a casual flirtation. When she arrived at her Aunt A.'s house, Lydia was in the garden, tending to her collection of exotic flowers by moonlight. Another of her eccentric pastimes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lydia observed, setting down her pruning shears. "Or perhaps discovered a hidden treasure." "Maybe both," Ashley replied, dropping onto a garden bench. "Aunt Lyd, how did you know Uncle Jack was worth risking everything for?" Lydia's expression softened at the mention of her late husband. "I didn't know, darling. That is the terrifying, exhilarating truth about love. It is always a leap of faith. Jack could have broken my heart into 1,000 pieces. Instead, he gave me the happiest 20 years of my life. But what if it doesn't work out? What if I am being foolish?" Lydia sat beside her, taking Ashley's hands in her soil-stained ones. "The only true foolishness is refusing joy when it presents itself, out of fear of potential pain. Whatever or whoever has you this conflicted must be rather special indeed." Ashley stared at the envelope still clutched in her hand. "He is, and that is what terrifies me." The next week passed in a blur of consultations. With the lawyer Aunt Lydia had recommended, brilliant woman, met her at my Renaissance poetry retreat. With Mia and other trusted staff at Coastal Brew, and most importantly, with herself. Ashley had always prided herself on careful decision-making, weighing options methodically before committing to a path. But this situation defied her usual approach, blending professional opportunity with personal feelings in a way that made objective analysis nearly impossible. Christopher had kept his distance, sending only a brief text. "Take all the time you need. I meant every word." His restraint only made her more conflicted. Part of her had hoped he might fight harder, might try to persuade her, giving her a reason to refuse both offers. Instead, his patience demonstrated a respect that made dismissing him increasingly difficult. On Friday morning, Ashley arrived at Coastal Brew an hour before opening, needing the solace of her familiar routine. The rich aroma of freshly ground beans scented her as she prepared the first batch of cold brew, the methodical process soothing her tangled thoughts. "I thought I might find you here," came a voice from the doorway. Ashley turned to find James Porter, Christopher's COO, watching her with a thoughtful expression. They'd met briefly when James came to review the partnership documents with her and her lawyer. "Mr. Porter," she acknowledged, setting down the coffee filter. "The cafe isn't tea open yet." "I know, and please, call me James," he gestured, to the empty chair across from her. "May I?" Ashley nodded, curious about this unexpected visit. "Christopher doesn't know I am here," James began, settling into the chair. "And he'd probably fire me if he did, which would be quite the achievement, considering we've been friends since college." "Why are you here, then?" Ashley asked directly. James studied her for a moment. "Because in 15 years of working with Christopher Lee, I've never seen him like this." "Like what?" "Distracted, uncertain, hopeful." James leaned forward. "You've gotten under his skin in a way no one has since Eliza." "Eliza?" Ashley couldn't help asking. "His ex-fiancée, brilliant investment banker who decided 3 years ago that Christopher's commitment to the business left insufficient a room for her in his life." James shrugged. She wasn't wrong. Ashley absorbed this information, adding it to her mental picture of Christopher. "That doesn't explain why you risking your job to talk to me." Because the partnership offer is legitimate," James said bluntly. "We've been discussing restructuring Coastal Brew for months. Your ideas, which Christopher has been subtly implementing based on your conversations, have already increased. Profits at 3 test locations. This isn't tea about his feelings for you. It has sound business. And if I reject the personal relationship but accept the partnership, then you will have a brilliant career opportunity and Christopher will respect your boundaries, James replied without hesitation. He'd be disappointed, certainly, but your professional relationship would remain intact. Ashley studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Why are you telling me all this? James stood, straightening his immaculate suit. Because I believe in the partnership's potential, and because Christopher Lee is the most honorable man I know, despite his momentary lapse in judgment about his identity. Whatever you decide, you should do so with complete information. He moved toward the door, then paused. He'll be at the final wine class tonight. Just thought you should know. After James left, Ashley moved through her opening routine. Mechanically, her mind elsewhere. By closing time, she made her decision. The Vineyard Institute's classroom was nearly full when Ashley arrived for the final session, deliberately timing her entrance to just before the class began. Christopher was already seated at their usual table, his expression carefully neutral as she took her place beside him. "You came," he said softly. "I said I would," she replied, echoing her words from their last encounter. The instructor announced that tonight's final challenge would involve blind identification of wines they studied throughout the course, with pairs competing against each other for highest accuracy. Work together, the instructor emphasized. Communication is key to success. As glasses were distributed, Christopher turned to Ashley. "Shall we establish a strategy, or would you prefer to work independently?" "Together," she said decisively. "If we're going to do this, we should do it properly." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, but he simply nodded and began methodically assessing the first wine. They fell into a surprisingly effective rhythm, Christopher identifying structural elements while Ashley picked out subtle flavor notes. Their complementary approaches made them formidable, and by the final wine, they'd pulled ahead of the other pairs. "Remarkable teamwork," the instructor commented as she tallied their perfect score. "You two seem to intuitively understand each other's strengths." As certificates were distributed and classmates exchanged contact information, the charged silence between Ashley and Christopher grew almost unbearable. "Would you walk with me?" she finally asked. "There is a path along the harbor. Good talk." Relief washed over his features. "I'd like that." "Oh." The night was clear, stars impossibly bright above the harbor as glittering waters. They walked in silence until Ashley stopped at a bench overlooking the marina. "I've reviewed the partnership offer," she began. "And?" His voice was carefully controlled. "I'd like to accept, with one modification." She turned to face him fully. "I want to earn my ownership stake, not have it given to me. 51% stays with Lee Hospitality Group initially, with provisions for me to increase my share based on performance metrics we established together." Christopher's surprise was evident. "You're deliberately making it more difficult. For yourself. Why?" "Because I need to know I've earned it," she said simply. "My parents taught me that nothing worthwhile comes without effort." He studied her for a long moment. "If that is what you want, we can certainly structure it that way. James will draw up revised documents tomorrow." "Thank you." Ashley took a deep breath. "That is the business decision. As for the personal matter..." Christopher went very still, his eyes never leaving her face. "And I can deny there's something between us," she continued carefully. "Something I haven't felt before. But I need honesty, Christopher, complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Can you promise me that?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "And no more omissions, no more secrets." "Then I'd like to try." she said softly, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. The smile that transformed his face made her heart skip. I can work with slowly and carefully, he said, reaching for her hand, as long as genuinely remains the foundation. As his fingers intertwined with hers, Ashley felt the last of her reservations dissolving. This brilliant, complex man, who turned her world upside down in a matter of weeks, was still partially a mystery, but one she suddenly found herself eager to solve, one layer at a time. "There's something else you should know," Christopher said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "My father is dying to meet you. Apparently Kawa the cat has already given his approval, based solely on my descriptions." Ashley laughed. "The cat approved of me? Well, that settles it then." "He is an excellent judge of character," Christopher said with mock seriousness. "Far better than his owner, who took entirely too long to recognize the extraordinary woman standing right in front of him." As the harbor lights reflected in the water before them, Ashley leaned slightly closer. "We have time to make up for that now." "Yes," Christopher agreed, his voice low as he closed the distance between them. "We certainly do." Their first kiss was gentle but electric, a promise of possibilities neither had dared imagine just weeks ago. When they finally parted, Ashley couldn't help but smile at the wonder in his eyes. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I still haven't tasted your father's original recipes that launched Lee Hospitality Group." "Is that so?" De Christopher responded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I believe that can be arranged, though I should warn you, once you taste his signature dishes, you'll understand why I was so particular about that Americano." "I happen to like particular people," Ashley admitted, "especially ones who apologize when they wrong and have the courage to be vulnerable when it matters." As they walked hand in hand along the moonlit harbor, Ashley thought about the day she confronted a difficult customer, never imagining he would become the owner of both her career aspirations and potentially her heart. Life had a curious way of bringing the unexpected right when you least anticipated it, and sometimes that unexpected turn was exactly what you needed most. Epilogue, 1 year later. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Christopher asked, watching as Ashley adjusted the hand-painted sign above the door. "For the 10th time, yes," she laughed, stepping back to admire their work. Coastal Bloom. It read the elegant script with specialty coffee and wine in smaller letters beneath. The flagship location of their new joint venture gleamed in the morning sunlight, a revolutionary concept combining specialty coffee service by day with wine-tasting experiences in the evening. After 6 months as managing partner of Coastal Brew, Ashley had proven her business acumen so thoroughly that Christopher had accelerated her ownership timeline. When she proposed this new concept, merging their shared passions, he'd been instantly captivated. "It's perfect," Richard Lee declared, approaching with Kawa perched regally in his special carrier. Despite his Dr. SS predictions, Richard had rallied over the past year, finding renewed energy in mentoring Ashley and watching his son's transformation. "Grace would have loved this place." "You think so?" Christopher asked softly. "Without question, it has her warmth all over it." Richard nodded, then winked at Ashley. "Plus, she always said you needed someone who could match your stubborn streak." "I prefer to call it determined," Ashley and Christopher said simultaneously, then laughed at their unexpected harmony. Inside, Mia, now operations manager for all Coastal Bloom locations, directed the staff through final preparations. For their grand opening, Aunt Lydia flitted about, adding artistic touches to the decor and charming potential investors with her eccentric energy. "Did you ever imagine this?" Christopher asked, slipping his arm around Ashley's waist as they watched their vision and come to life. That day when you defended Mia from the horrible customer. Never, she admitted, leaning into his embrace. I was just trying to do the right thing. You were still doing that, he observed, just on a much larger scale. As the first customers began to arrive, Ashley felt a surge of gratitude for that fateful confrontation and everything that had followed. The wine classes, the difficult conversations, the leap of faith they'd both taken. What had begun as a defense of a colleague had transformed into a partnership that enriched both their lives immeasurably. "Ready to make some coffee?" Christopher asked, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. Ashley smiled up at the man who had become not just her business partner, but her closest confidant and greatest champion. "With you, always." Together, they stepped forward to greet their first guests, their fingers intertwined, just as their lives had become two distinct strengths, creating something neither could have achieved alone. Behind the counter gleamed a framed copy of their very first interaction, the receipt from that fateful Americano, preserved as a reminder that sometimes the most important connections begin with conflict, courage, and a perfectly brewed cup of coffee.